of Natural History. This is Dr. Andy Jones. He's the curator of ornithology. We're here in the research collection where they have over 30,000 specimens of different birds from Northeast Ohio and from all over the globe. He's here to tell us today about all the excitement with the birds and how we can learn from them. Take it away, Andy.
Right, let's take a look. Let's begin with the Northern Cardinal, Ohio state bird. This is one of many trays of Northern Cardinal. These are all male, and these are all research specimens in our collection. They all have tags tied to them that indicate the day that the bird died and also the location that it came from. Some of these birds are fairly recent. For example, here is a bird from 1990. Next to it is another bird from 2004. But we also have specimens like this one. This dates from February 25th, 1939. As you'll notice, the colors have held up really well. We keep our birds in temperature and humidity controlled conditions. They're out of direct light. And so these specimens should last essentially forever. We have specimens that are over 150 years old within our collection. I realize as we open up these trays, if these were trays of mosquito specimens, you might sort of cheer us on, but to open up a tray of dead birds might have a bit of a different impact. I do want to point out most of our specimens that come in today are actually from rehabilitation centers where they're attempting to save birds' lives. Many of the birds don't make it, and those end up in our collections. We also get birds as roadkill, and a substantial number come in as window collisions. Birds migrate at night, they don't see buildings, and they then collide with the windows. As an example, we can take a look at some of the white-throated sparrows. If we take a look at some of the white-throated sparrows here, they all again have the tags with the information about their date of death and the location. You'll see that this specimen here collided with the terminal tower on the 18th of September in 1930. Beside that, we can find other specimens that collided with buildings downtown in the last few years. I'm not pointing out the terminal tower to say that it's special. I'm just saying that tall buildings in general throughout the U.S. pose obstacles for migrating birds. They rely on stars at night to navigate. If we have cloudy conditions, the birds become disoriented. They see lights atop buildings or communications towers or other structures, and they begin to fly around them and eventually collide with them. Buildings in downtown Cleveland have been known to kill hundreds of birds in a season. And that's certainly true for all of the large buildings throughout the United States. For a lot of species, we have lots of individual specimens within that species. The reason for that is, just like in humans, if you wanted to study the biology of a disease, you wouldn't study a single person with that disease, you would study many individuals. If you want to understand a common bird like white-throated sparrow, you would actually need to look at hundreds of individuals. They may vary throughout the year, throughout geographic locations. There are also differences between males, females, and adults and young birds. In addition to that, museum specimens are great for bringing in the time component. So if we take a look at the Peregrine Falcons, some of these specimens are about 100 years old. Others are from recent populations of peregrine falcons. You may be familiar with peregrines from downtown Cleveland. But this is a species that essentially disappeared from the region, and it was thanks to man's efforts that we've reintroduced the peregrine falcon into the eastern United States. Their disappearance was really tied to DDT and other pesticides. This was popularized in Rachel Carson's Silent Spring, but to actually establish the relationship between DDT and its effect on birds, we had to look at peregrine falcons and especially eggshells within museum specimens. Specimens that were collected in the late 1800s could be compared to birds from the 1950s and the 1960s after things like DDT were introduced. You could look at the thickness of the eggshell and see that the thickness had remained the same through time until you got up until the time that we introduced pesticides. Then the eggshell started thinning. The female would attempt to incubate the eggs, She would sit on the eggs and they would break, so the birds were no longer able to reproduce. Once we removed DDT and other pesticides, the birds were able to successfully reproduce again. But the important thing is, when people collected the Peregrine Falcon eggs in the late 1800s, they had no idea how those were going to be used for some groundbreaking research. We're at the museum's Raptor Center, and this is Michelle from the Department of Wildlife Resources here at the museum. She's holding Omega. Omega is an eastern screech owl, and this may look like a fairly exotic bird, but this is actually a common backyard bird in the Cleveland area. This species, like all other owls, would be primarily nocturnal, so you may not see it day to day. However, if you have older trees that have cavities in them, or if you put up a nest box with a large entry, the birds may actually spend the evenings, or spend the days roosting in those nest boxes, and you may be able to see them at dawn or dusk. Eastern screech owls actually come in two different color versions. This is obviously the gray version, but you can also find red eastern screech owls.
Well, here we are at the Natural History Museum. I just had a fascinating journey about birds with Dr. Andy Jones, Curator of Ornithology. I hope you've enjoyed it as well. Thanks so much. Have a cool Cleveland day. Thanks for joining us here at the museum.